Good morning. This is the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. It is May 22nd, 9 a.m. We will start with roll call.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Cross.
Present.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Oath. Commissioner Ray.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 6 of 7 commissioners present.
Great. Great to see everybody. Welcome to our meeting, to the 57 participants that are with us this morning. We start with commissioner comments. Does any commissioner have comments for the rest of us? Seeing none, we move to consent agenda. Does anyone have questions with regard to consent? Commissioner Cross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one comment on the draft order, for the proposed order for the consent agenda. While the heading is correct and the end is correct, it does mention Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission instead of the ECMC in that first paragraph. So just want to make sure that that's changed before it's finalized.
Thank you, Commissioner. We will make sure to change that.
With that clarification, do we have a motion?
I'd move to approve consent.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Moving right along, we move to docket 240200054, the high priority habitat maps rulemaking. ECMC will consider additions and amendments to Commission Rules of Practice and Procedure 100 series as part of its high priority maps rulemaking. I believe we will first hear from Deputy Director Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I get started, if I could ask Ms. Amaro to re-invite Mr. Elm. He's looking for his panelist link. I just got a chat from him. And with that, I will get started. So thank you again, Mr. Chair. For the record, I am Mimi Larson, Deputy Director of Policy and Administration at the ECMC. On behalf of staff, I am pleased to introduce today the High Priority Habitat Map rulemaking. ECMC conducts an HPH rulemaking on an annual basis to incorporate the changes and updates to the HPH maps made by our partners at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. In a moment, you will hear from our partners at CPW, who will provide you with background and information on the updates proposed in this year's rulemaking. Before I turn it over to CPW, I want to thank them for their diligent work in preparing the updates to the maps and for their consistent outreach and work with our stakeholders. I also want to take a moment to thank all of our stakeholders and parties for their engagement in this process and dedication to working with ECMC and CPW. With that, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Karen Voltura and to Taylor Elm, and we may just need a moment or two to get Mr. Elm into the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. I appreciate that. And actually, I apologize. Dr. Voltura will kick our presentation off, so hopefully we can begin as soon as she gets elevated to panelist here.
Looks like we have Dr. Volterra. She just needs to unmute and visualize.
Good morning, Chair Robbins. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hey. Good morning, Chair Robbins, Commissioners, Director Murphy, Assistant Director Larson. I'm Karen Voltura. I'm the Regional Energy Liaison for Colorado Parks and Wildlife in the Southeast region. And today I will be presenting with Mr. Elm on the proposed 2024 updates to the high priority rulemaking maps. And if you'll just give me a minute to share my screen. Are the slides visible to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. I'll be presenting information on process-related updates real briefly. And then proposed updates to the high priority habitat maps regarding raptor nest data and grouse data. Mr. Allen will be then covering the aquatic updates proposed for this year, as well as updates specific to the Northwest region and the species activity mapping. As you know from previous CPW presentations, these high priority habitat maps are a subset of a much larger list of habitats mapped and monitored by CPW. Habitats on this list are ones that we have good geographical distributions for the species in question, as well as scientific support that those species are affected by disturbance and development, and where we have reliable information supporting the recommendations that we make to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. In addition to helping us make sure that we're using the best available science, it ensures consistency across the state, as well as consistency across various land use and energy processes. The updates today are also to help ensure that ECMC maps have the best available information that we have, as well as remain consistent with other processes, including federal planning processes. I do want to go back a little bit in terms of process questions to sort of where we ended last year. Last year, during the hearing and presentations, we provided a very detailed update overview of the CPW consultation process. And during the rulemaking from stakeholders and from commissioners, there were discussions on opportunities for engagement with CPW and the process kind of across all regions. CPW had agreed to work with ECMC to produce an operator guidance document that would be an overview of the consultation practices and summarize everything that was discussed in the hearing and in discussions with operators. This was drafted right after the hearing, and draft was sent to ECMC, I think on November 1st, that CPW took the first run at it. We continued to work with ECMC staff over the next month to make sure that all the rules were incorporated and that everything was included. In December of 2023, it was sent to all of the registered parties for the 2023 rulemaking. I believe some of them received it in early January, but they all had an opportunity to look at this and ensure that it addressed the questions and the issues that were raised. Once all parties had the opportunity to provide feedback, revisions were done in March, working closely with ECMC, and the final was released in April 2024. There's a strong focus in that on the voluntary pre-consultation piece, as that was taken on a larger role with the implementation of Senate Bill 181, and there were more questions from operators and other stakeholders on that component. However, we believed it was important to capture all of the opportunities to engage with CPW over the entire permitting process, and where CPW has a role. So the document itself does cover A to Z, from the first phone call we might get from an operator all the way to sort of those permit hearings and what CPW's responsibilities are and how operators can engage with CPW and ECMC throughout that process. And to be clear, this is just a guidance document. There's nothing new in here. There's no rules. It is not meant to be that way. It's just meant to highlight, again, engagement, CPW's commitment to the process and our responsibilities within that, as well as how operators can make the most of that engagement as well. We did incorporate almost all of the feedback we got from stakeholders. In cases where we couldn't, word for word kind of take we did make edits to meet the intent of the request in a way that was consistent with both CPW and ECMC processes. So I did want to note that, because that came up in last year's hearing, that is available and posted now to the ECMC website. On to today's maps. I do want a few other process adjustments that we've made over the years. In previous years, we've changed the notice of rulemaking from January to February 28th, and that allowed us to add a review period prior to the notice, so the maps are released. We try for a month, anywhere up to 45, 60 days, however much we can do in that. Opportunities for stakeholders to provide feedback on the draft maps. And then we hold an ECMC stakeholder meeting prior to the notice so that parties have access to the maps, both print PDF maps as well as digital maps prior to the rulemaking. Based on feedback from last year we continued to have stakeholder meetings throughout the rulemaking process. This year, in response to that, we did add additional individual meetings with stakeholders prior to release of the map. So we tried to kind of move some of that up earlier in the process, and Mr. Elm will talk in more detail on what those consisted of. And we also submitted a written summary of the proposed changes resulting from those species activity mapping, and those were released at the same time the draft maps were, and were available to on the website. So just a quick review of the timeline. Again, those meetings last year that we had kind of in the middle of the rulemaking were moved to the fall, starting in November and running through January of 2024. In December of 2023, we finalized our map package and transmitted that to ECMC. The holidays always slow things down, and we had some QA/QC issues, so those were published in January. And then the ECMC stakeholder meeting on February 8th, and the notice of rulemaking February 28th. Throughout that period, there is also an ECMC Google form open for submission for feedback on the maps, for any data submission or for any questions that might come to CPW. Only 2 comments were submitted at that time and did not have any substantive changes or requests for changes to the maps. And that brings us to today. I'm going to start going through an overview of some of these statewide changes. This map shows all of the HPH layers merged together. So the green is all the existing map. Red are proposed additions to the map for this year. And areas in black are proposed to be removed from the maps after this, based on the decision at this hearing. If you go to the online mapper and look at the GIS layers, you can click and look on individual layers. This is just sort of an overview. And Mr. Elm will talk more about the majority of the changes that are in the Northeast region. I do want to identify a few things that came up during stakeholder meetings with questions from parties. There's some addition red in the Northeast region, Morgan County, kind of just south of 76. It might be hard to see on this, but that is greater prairie chicken habitats. There were questions if we had added any big game to the Northeast, and we have not. This is all greater prairie chicken habitat, and you can see a little further to the Northeast and out to the Kansas border, there's some areas in black, and those are greater prairie chicken leks that are no longer considered active and are proposed to be removed. Overall, there was an approximately 1.5% increase in total consultation areas, and that includes the 1202C layers, the 1202D layers, and those consultation layers that are not related necessarily to the 1200 series. Going at just looking through the 1202C habitats, and again, these are the most restrictive, being no surface occupancy. This map is the same pattern. It shows green is existing, red are proposed additions to the map, and black are proposed deletions. And it can be a little challenging to see on this. This does include, you can see areas that Mr. Elm will go into a little more detail, a fair number of stream segments in the Northwest region that are black. Those were adjusted and will be removed from the habitat layers. And on the Eastern Plains, there's a fair bit of addition of native aquatic habitats, and those are the red lines on here. There are also, we update state wildlife layers every year, and there's a fairly large state wildlife area in the Northeast region that is showing in red. That is Jumping Cow State Wildlife Area. It has been a state wildlife area for quite some time. It just hadn't been mapped in previous iterations. So this is more of a correction in that it now is showing up, but it has always been and has always been managed as a state wildlife area. So anyone developing in that area had already been kind of talking to us. In terms of other habitats, compared to last year, there were smaller proposed habitat increases for leks. Last year, I think we had about 21,000 acres of new leks. And again, these are no surface occupancy, so strict regulatory oversight for that. We only have under 6,000 acres added this year. There were also smaller increases overall for raptor nests compared to 2023. Again, there are some larger changes in those state wildlife areas with a net gain of 30,000 acres compared to 1,400 in 2023. And again, most of those acres are more map corrections than new properties. But we do, as management changes on these properties, some will drop off and some will add each year. Next, I want to look at the details on raptor nest in the state. Again, raptor nest data is collected every year statewide. We've described this process in detail in both the 2022 hearing for the map updates, as well as captured those details in the statement of basis and purpose written in 2022, as well as the FAQ release last year in regards to the rulemaking. Again, data is primarily from our own CPW survey data. We do have data partners, both federal land managers and some other research organizations or larger organizations where we have a long history of data sharing and understanding their survey methodologies, and they're considered a trusted data partner. We also have CPW verified data that is submitted by other groups, and that can be counties, local planning agencies, developers, NGOs, individuals. If they reach out to us and provide that, it is either verified from the information they provide, if they have photos and time date stamped information. If not, we add it to our list, and the following breeding season, we send our own staff and volunteers out to verify that. It is updated every year. Nests have to be active within the past 5 years for them to be included on this list. And it's a subset of raptors that we track in the state. For bald and golden eagles, the changes this year were very, very similar to last year. A slight increase in bald eagle, and this is a 1/4 mile buffer around the nest, equivalent to about 44, a net gain of about 44 bald eagle nests, and a net gain of about 19 golden eagle nests. Golden eagle nests are more of a concern than bald eagle nests for numbers, so it's good to see those numbers coming back up. Last year, we did have an increase in ferruginous hawk nests. Unfortunately, this year we have a decrease, so it looks like about a net loss of 5 active nests. Ferruginous hawks are a state species of concern. There were smaller changes to peregrine and prairie falcon, adding less than 3,000 acres. No changes to the goshawk nest database or to the federally mapped Mexican spotted owl nest information. Goshawks we don't have a lot in our database. They are mostly managed on Forest Service lands, and Forest Service has asked us not to share that data publicly on nest locations. However, anybody developing on Forest Service is working with the Forest Service on their surface use agreement, and it would come out during those discussions. So there are no changes to that, but again, we don't have public access for a large portion of that data set. The next issue or topic I'll talk about are the LEC and grouse databases. Just a quick reminder, we have 2 main habitat categories under the 1200 series. 1202C habitats are those individual LEC locations, and they have a LEC buffer that's specific to the species and based on the literature. So LECs are important of themselves, and that birds will display on this, and they're also an indicator of high quality nesting habitat. So a higher proportion of these birds will nest in the vicinity of a LEC. And so for most species, these LEC buffers are meant to capture about 50% of the kind of higher quality nesting locations. And that's why those buffers, again, can vary. But again, they're not just protecting that actual LEC, they're protecting a large proportion of the habitat for breeding. The production habitat is, for 4 species, a larger LEC buffer. So instead of going out to 0.6 acres, it goes out to 2.2. And that is meant to capture the vast majority of the rest of the breeding and the rest of the nest and brood rearing habitat. So again, these are not no surface occupancy, but they are under the 1202D habitats, where we look at density and a lot of other timing and noise impacts for that. For two of the species, for lesser prairie chicken and for greater sage grouse, that production habitat is a separate mapped layer and it's not necessarily related to these LEC buffers, but LEC locations do come into how we map that. Collection of this LEC data is done on an annual basis, and these are species-specific survey methodologies. So each species in this list has a unique or specific survey methodology that we use. These are extremely time-intensive and labor-intensive, but we believe these are important habitats to track. And if we know where they are, we can include them in these layers and for these protections, and provide the most up-to-date information to stakeholders. There are also consultation habitats only for both lesser prairie chicken and for greater sage grouse. And again, these don't come with the same rules that apply to 1202 and 1202D, but habitats that we want to have a conversation. For lesser prairie chickens, they're federally listed. That's what triggers a federal consultation and allows us to have that discussion with the operator and put them in communication with the service. But it also allows us, if ranges are expanding or if there's additional habitat, we can identify that even prior to a map update. In terms of the updates for 2024 as proposed, there is a small update to the LEC numbers and the LEC acres. This is primarily driven by greater prairie chickens on the Eastern Plains, but there are smaller increases proposed for Columbian sharp-tailed grouse and greater sage grouse. Gunnison sage grouse, lesser prairie chicken, and plains sharp-tailed grouse all had decreases in the active LECs that will be mapped under the proposed updates. For the 1202D habitats, these are the production areas. There is a 74,000 acre increase. Large portion of that is due to the greater prairie chicken LEC buffers. Again, if production is an extension of the LEC buffer, you're going to see trends in the same way. If you have more LECs, you're going to have more production habitat. There is a decrease again in Gunnison sage grouse and plains sharp-tailed grouse production habitats. Lesser prairie chicken habitats will be staying the same. There's no proposed changes to the focal area, which is production area for that species. And again, the trends are similar to last year, but at a smaller scale. There are some proposed changes to greater sage grouse, and I am going to pass the presentation to Mr. Elm at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. And good morning, commissioners. I'm Taylor Elm. I'm the energy liaison for CPW's Northwest region. Yeah, as Dr. Volterra mentioned, CPW did make some small changes to greater sage grouse habitats for the first time, really, since they were originally mapped in 2019. We identified the need for these changes or updates during our participation in BLM's ongoing 2023 Greater Sage Grouse Resource Management Plan amendment process. CPW is participating in that as a cooperating agency and providing data. The proposed changes this year result in approximately 49,000 acres of new priority habitat management areas, or PHMA, for sage grouse. As Dr. Volterra mentioned, that's just over a 2.5% increase to that layer overall. This increase results from essentially converting, and sorry, Karen, next slide if you could. Converting general habitat management areas, or GHMA, over to PHMA in an area west of Craig that you'll see in the top two maps there that have the pink priority habitat management area layers designated. This particular change in that area was determined to be needed due to the increased number of sage grouse that we have observed lekking and breeding within that area compared to 5 years ago when the original mapping was done. The addition of that PHMA was done with the same methodology or modeling technique as the original habitat mapping was done, just incorporating those LEC sites into the model now that they are large enough that they meet the criteria. And then additionally, CPW is proposing an increase of approximately 1,750 acres of general habitat management area near the Colorado-Utah border, just north of Dinosaur National Monument. This addition to general habitat and actually overall range for grouse in Colorado is based on GPS location data that was shared with CPW by the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Sage grouse captured by Utah were shown spending significant amounts of time across the border into Colorado within the small area that was previously not mapped as grouse habitat and overall range. Both of these proposed changes are anticipated to be included in the BLM's current planning effort, with an expected record of decision on that plan during calendar year 2024. And so there is an opportunity here within this calendar year, I think, for BLM and the state to maintain consistency on habitat mapping for greater sage grouse. Next slide. So moving on to another statewide update for this year, the aquatic high priority habitats. In 2023, CPW staff conducted a statewide review of our aquatic HPH designations database and the corresponding GIS layers. This annual update was intended to address some stakeholder concerns regarding potential inaccuracies, especially related to ephemeral and intermittent sportfish waters on the western slope. Additionally, CPW utilized this update opportunity to incorporate new survey data and add aquatic designations to some previously unmapped waterways. This statewide update was intended to get CPW essentially caught up across the state, since the current maps were still those layers that were utilized from 2019 for the original mission change rulemaking. At the bottom of this slide, you can see proposed changes for the 4 aquatic HPH layers, with a note that there are no proposed changes to the cutthroat trout crucial habitat. And also just to point out that changes to CPW designated gold medal waters result from additions to the Gunnison and Taylor rivers in Gunnison County. These changes were approved by CPW's commission in January of 2023, but were not able to be incorporated into last year's rulemaking due to the draft maps having already been posted at that time. And as Dr. Volterra mentioned, this map's a little bit hard to see details at a statewide scale, but she kind of called out some of those red linear features on the plains are primarily additions to the native species conservation waters due to new sampling data that is available. And then some of those smaller kind of red squiggly lines in the Northwest region are some of the removals, mostly to the sportfish management waters. As I mentioned, a lot of those being determined to be ephemeral or intermittent in nature and no longer supporting sportfish populations. And then just one other reminder that these layers, as far as CPW is concerned during the consultation process on actual permitting, are as with the rest of the HPH layers, are really a starting point. We always want to get out there in person, see if these are designated accurately, if any ground truthing is needed, as determined necessary. And next slide. So going forward, CPW's aquatic section does intend to start conducting regionally based aquatic HPH reviews. And actually, the intent is for those to track our SAM mapping rotation around the state, as we've described in the past, that counterclockwise rotation among CPW regions. So any proposed changes will be incorporated into the overall HPH updates for the CPW region doing their SAM updates during that calendar year. This regional update cycle is anticipated to address some stakeholder concerns that we heard regarding regulatory uncertainty when planning for future development, especially if these updates were done at a statewide scale every year. So with this regional rotation approach, specific areas would not be updated more often than once every 4 years. Additionally, this schedule will allow stakeholders to notify CPW about waters which may warrant further review and provide CPW staff adequate time to get out and survey and conduct field inspections and do those prior to map updates and the rulemaking process beginning. Next slide. Okay, so moving into the Northwest region's SAM mapping process and the resulting HPH updates, just want to remind everybody, as Dr. Volterra mentioned, based on our rotation that I was just talking about, a large portion of the proposed changes this year are within CPW's Northwest region. Those of you that were involved with the rulemaking last year know that a majority of the changes were in CPW's Northeast region, which had completed their SAM mapping process. And so this year we bump over to the Northwest. And next slide. Also, an important note that the last time CPW's Northwest region completed their SAM mapping was in 2018. The COVID-19 pandemic forced us to skip a year of SAM mapping and has resulted in a 5-year gap between updates instead of our typical 4-year gap. And next slide. Okay, this slide lists basically those HPH layers that are present in CPW's Northwest region and subject to this SAM mapping process that we do. You can see it mostly consists for us of the big game seasonal ranges found within rule category 1202D. Another quick reminder about CPW SAM and HPH data, and Dr. Volterra mentioned, these layers are utilized by a diverse group of state and federal agencies, local governments, NGOs, consultants, industry, etc., and for various land use planning and permitting purposes. So I think the take-home message is CPW doesn't map these layers specifically or solely for use in ECMC's oil and gas regulations. It's just one of the many places where they are used. Next slide. Okay, moving into some of these layers in more detail. This slide reports some of the percent changes being proposed for individual big game winter concentration areas and severe winter ranges. They vary between increases of approximately 1% to just over 4%. And important to note that these percent increases are specific to these individual layers, and they're not independent of each other due to the high degree of overlap that occurs within these seasonal ranges. So keep in mind that the total proposed increase to all Rule 1202D high priority habitat is only 2%. Also not specifically included in this slide is elk production areas or calving areas. These are proposed to increase by about 3%, and they also fall within Rule 1202D. And just so folks are aware, some of our largest additions to those elk calving areas are around the Steamboat Springs area. This is an area where CPW has been actively deploying GPS collars as part of an elk research project, and that influenced some of these mapping of new calving areas in that spot. Next slide. Okay, so staying with some of these big game ranges, there were a few consistent themes that were documented during the Northwest Region SAM mapping sessions as reasons for proposed changes in 2024. Primarily the use of new GPS collar technology and location data resulting from collared animals, coupled with our extensive winter classification flights and the location data that we collect from those, were really the leading reasons for changes to a lot of our winter range HPH layers. Additionally, CPW's Northwest region, as folks are aware, experienced one of our worst winters observed over the last couple of decades during the 2022-2023 winter. Extreme temperatures and snow conditions resulted in altered use of the landscape by big game animals, and in some areas influenced CPW's understanding and mapping of severe winter ranges in particular. And last, you can see on the map that's on this slide, some pretty large portions of the Northwest region burned in wildfires since 2018. This included 2 of the largest 3 fires recorded in Colorado history. And as you can imagine, these big fires often result in significant changes to the vegetation community and habitat conditions within these areas. This may result in some areas that are temporarily unsuitable for certain life history stages like calving or fawning, and it may quickly create new vegetation growth that animals may seek out as winter forage as well. And next slide. Okay, we've spoke about this quite a bit before, but one of the more significant changes proposed in 2024, especially in the Northwest region, but also extending to some changes in the Southwest region this year as well, are updates to CPW's big game migration corridor layers. As you recall, CPW's migration coordinator, Michelle Cowarden, presented on these new migration mapping techniques that CPW is utilizing. She presented to the commission back in February. And a recording of that presentation is available on ECMC's YouTube channel. If these slides are shared, I included a link here and would steer stakeholders in that direction for folks who would like a more detailed resource and additional information on the process that CPW is using to map migration corridors based on GPS collar data. And next slide. So I won't, since we have presented on that before, I won't go into all of the details on that methodology. I do want to hit on a few what I would consider kind of key points to these changes to migration corridors. Number one is from an operational standpoint, these proposed additions to migration corridors have a high degree, again, of overlap with other Rule 1202D habitats. And so even though the individual layers have increased by quite a bit, the changes from migration corridors result in approximately 1.5% increase to HPH overall. And then second, CPW does not have any timing limitations associated with the migration corridors. So in areas, especially on the west slope, where operations are frequently constrained by winter ranges, elk calving, and avian nesting activities such as raptors and sage grouse, these will not create additional restrictions on the timing of operations. And then last, just a note, CPW has heard concerns regarding the update schedule for migration corridors going forward. I just want to say that we do intend to incorporate new big game migration data and that GPS collar data into this data set as soon as it becomes available. This is so that we can confidently say that we're maintaining the best available science around migration corridors. But I will say that these incorporations of new data going forward are not intended to be as significant as they were this year, just due to the fact that this year's changes incorporated more than a decade worth of GPS collar data that had not been analyzed yet. And so future additions should be more targeted and likely more smaller in scale than they were this year. And next slide. Okay, to wrap things up, again, we appreciate this opportunity to present today on CPW's proposed HPH changes and updates for 2024. I do hope that CPW's additional outreach efforts during this year's rulemaking process and even before the process officially began were helpful and hopefully provided greater clarity regarding some of our proposed changes. CPW staff, as Dr. Volterra mentioned, in the Northwest region conducted 9 early outreach meetings with industry groups and individual operators. This occurred in late 2023, starting in November and running through December. And the intent of these was to discuss specific HPH changes within operators, kind of areas of operations, also discuss, what the operational impacts of those changes in map layers would be for those stakeholders. And I think Dr. Volterra mentioned this was before the formal map layers were posted. However, CPW did have kind of informal mapping tools and copies of map layers that we were able to share at that time and really go through and kind of take that deep dive for individual areas and what the changes looked like in those areas. And then also just another note that this year we prepared the document that we called Summary of Proposed Changes. And this was posted for stakeholders early in the rulemaking process. And I can say that CPW does intend to carry this practice forward for future map update rulemakings, and that actually we're already looking forward to beginning our SAM mapping process in the Southwest region, starting, I think, here just in a couple months. And last slide. Just to wrap it up for CPW, I think that was all we had today. And then we can take questions, or I'm not sure if the agenda had, I guess, public comments before that. So we'll turn it back over.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The agenda does have commissioner questions to the panel at this point. So if you could both be available, I'll look around the room and see if commissioners have questions. Commissioner Ray?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Volterra and Mr. Allen. This was really helpful. Just one clarifying question. Taylor, in your discussion of the aquatic habitats, there was a slide with changes to gold medal waters, et cetera. And you noted some changes, but then there was a footnote to that slide saying that gold medal waters were not an HPH layer. Can you explain that footnote?
Yeah, good question. Thank you for that, Commissioner Ray. So HPH is a subset of all the habitat layers that CPW maintains, and basically the suite of species and habitat layers that CPW makes land use comments on and that are incorporated into a lot of the processes that we work on. Gold medal waters are actually not a part of the high priority habitat list, but during the time of the mission change rulemaking and revisions to the 1200 series, there was a decision made to incorporate those gold medal waters and the value that they have to Colorado into the ECMC regulations. So they were incorporated into the regulations, but just was a clarifying note that they're not actually formally included on CPW's high priority habitat list.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
And the process for designating gold medal waters has to do with their quality as a fishery, or their quality to the state as a fisheries resource. So there's a list of things it has to meet in terms of quality, size of fish over a certain amount of time, and then they're voted on by the CPW, the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission, to be included. So there's a very strict list of categorizations that it needs to meet, but they're included primarily for their value as a fishery resource state.
Other questions from commissioners to the panel? All right, excellent job. I don't see other questions. We next are going to move to some party presentations. We do not have any public comment on this docket. Perhaps let's take 5 minutes or so and get the next party up. That's American Petroleum Institute for 8 minutes. So let's return at 9:49, 9:48, something like that. All right, we are back. Docket 2402000054, the high priority habitat maps rulemaking. We now, I believe, have API represented by Jim Martin up for, I believe, I've been told 8 minutes.
Morning. Excuse me. Good morning, Chair Robbins, commissioners. It's nice to see you again. And that's correct. We gave away 2 of our minutes, so we have about 8 minutes this morning. For the record, I am Jim Martin of Beatty and Wozniak, and I'm here today representing the American Petroleum Institute Colorado, or as it's better known, API Colorado. I'm also joined by Mr. Paulus of API Colorado. As stated in their briefs, API Colorado generally supports the proposed rule updating the high priority habitat maps in northwestern Colorado. In fact, it appears there is no opposition to this rulemaking proposal. I would like to digress for a moment, and just for a moment, to thank CPW for addressing API Colorado's concern, and perhaps the concern of others, about the frequency of updates to aquatic habitat. We heard that during their presentation, and as I said, we appreciate it. API Colorado also appreciated the comment in the statement of basis and purpose, or the draft statement of basis and purpose, about maps being a starting point in pre-consultation and consultation. We've heard that from CPW in other forums, but it was great to see it, useful to see it in the statement of basis and purpose. We also agree with the CPW comment this morning, and I think they've said it elsewhere, that there's a lot of value in pre-consultation and in consultation, in a consultation process that the commission has established in its rules. Because API Colorado generally supports the proposed rule, API Colorado did not brief issues raised or at least mentioned by other parties. Those issues include the extent to which the commission can or should defer to CPW proposals, the appropriate standard of review, and the adequacy of the administrative record. We just didn't believe it was necessary. And as I mentioned, API Colorado did not engage in those issues since there appears to be no opposition to the proposed rule. In that spirit, API Colorado wants to commend and extend its appreciation to the commission staff and CPW who developed the proposed rule. We recognize the demands on everyone's time, and we appreciate the efforts of the two agencies to make this a boring hearing. With that, Chair Robbins, we reserve the balance of our time for rebuttal, if any. We do have one witness, as I mentioned, Mr. Paulus is with us, who's available to answer any questions you may have. And with that, thank you, Chair Robbins and commissioners.
Very good. Does any commissioner have questions of the applicant or the applicant's attorney? All right, seeing none, we will let you move off the panel and bring up Western Resource Advocates.
Thank you, commissioners.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Robbins, Commissioners, and Director Murphy. I'm Tarn Udall. I represent Western Resource Advocates, and with me today is WRA's expert witness, Pat Dorsey. Also note at the beginning that Colorado Wildlife Federation, Audubon, and Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership endorsed WRA's presentation and Pat Dorsey's testimony. WRA asked the Commission to adopt the updates to the high priority habitat maps as recommended by CPW. CPW has demonstrated today, and the record confirms that the map updates meet the definition of HPH, and there's ample justification for CPW's suggested updates to the maps. As API noted, no party contests the map updates themselves, and this is because the maps represent the best available science, and the record demonstrates the depth of experience, professional judgment, and rigorous and expert data collection and analysis that went into CPW's recommended updates. Today's rulemaking is narrowly focused, and any issues beyond the recommended updates to the maps are beyond the scope of the rulemaking. We underscore API's compliments that this might be a boring rulemaking and urge the commissioners to just limit the inquiry to the maps themselves. Do you want to quickly address some of the concerns raised by other parties in the pre-hearing filings about the April 2024 guidance document, information CPW may withhold during the pre-application consultations, and the sharing of site-specific information during consultation? The guidance document is final and is quite comprehensive. It reflects CPW's commitment to early and robust pre-consultation and meaningful engagement and coordination with operators throughout the formal consultation process. It also demonstrates the agency's consideration of site-specific information and its practice of conducting site visits. The guidance document explains how CPW approaches sharing data supporting the HPH issue, and there's no justification to require CPW to generally allow for greater access to the data CPW uses to identify HPH. And second, the existing rules on consultation already provide ample opportunities to present site-specific information to CPW and therefore address what the industry parties raised as concerns. The rules give CPW a lot of latitude to fine-tune its HPH designations and to consider site-specific conditions. Specifically, Rule 309E3C provides an off-ramp from consultation, and it allows an operator to demonstrate to CPW that the identified HPH or wildlife species triggering the consultation are no longer present or likely to return, or that the area is either primarily or completely developed for uses that are incompatible with wildlife habitat. Finally, the existing rules in the guidance document allow for meaningful public participation, and changes to them could undermine that important policy outcome. Pat Dorsey will now provide her testimony, and following, we welcome questions and would reserve any remaining time for rebuttal. Thank you very much.
Apologies, I need to make some changes here with my monitor. Good morning, Chair Robbins, Commissioners, and Deputy Director Larson. My name is Pat Dorsey. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony today. I am currently the West Region Director of Conservation Operations for the National Wild Turkey Federation, but prior to that, I worked for Colorado Parks and Wildlife for 28 years. During that time, I held a number of positions where I was either directly engaged or supervised staff that were engaged in habitat mapping and energy and land use consultations. I ended my CPW career in 2019 as a Southwest Region Manager. It's due to my CPW work experience that I'm familiar with the high priority habitat map layers, how they're created and used by CPW and other agencies. I'd like to use my time here to highlight my written testimony and ultimately encourage the Commission to adopt the high priority habitat map updates. As you heard from CPW, the high priority habitats are well known and widely used for land use planning. CPW has repeatedly summarized for the record why it chose the species and habitats it did and how it updates and maintains the habitat maps. CPW is transparent about the maps, the wildlife species, their habitat requirements, and their recommendations, and all of those are available on CPW's website. Having this information documented and available publicly does two things. One, it maintains consistency in CPW's recommendations, adding predictability for projects and operators. And two, it allows operators to address concerns with CPW well in advance. CPW's high priority habitat maps and their recommendations represent the best available science that this commission can use to protect wildlife resources in Colorado. The map layers represent a plethora of data and analysis, including everything from published research to observational data. CPW's high priority habitat mapping is the most robust effort in Colorado with respect to where these wildlife species and their habitats occur across the state. The maps are updated regularly because wildlife populations are dynamic and their habitat use may change. The updates produce accurate, important science-based maps, and it is reasonable for this commission to adopt them for oil and gas development. I'd also like to make two additional points. The recently released CPW consultation guidance document provides operators with flexibility for developing projects and many avenues to engage with CPW, including formal consultation, consultation waivers, pre-application voluntary consultation, etc. For CPW, it lays out ways to resolve access to wildlife data on a case-by-case basis. And the agency is doing a great job of balancing the interests of the stakeholders with their mission to protect wildlife. This existing process has worked well for several years and should continue in place. And secondly, the CPW consultation process under the 300 series rules is robust and addresses agency or industry concerns as written. On a site-specific basis, operators can share information with CPW that counters the high priority habitat maps prior to submitting an application. CPW may concur, and a consultation is no longer warranted. The consultation process and the rules provide an off-ramp from consultation, and it's accurately and completely described in the guidance document that I just spoke about. This commission and CPW have worked very hard with industry to develop rules, a process, and a guidance document that provide flexibility for operators while protecting our wildlife. The mission change rules were put into place in 2020, and we've been through multiple high priority habitat map updates since then. The science-based approach used by CPW is credible and widely accepted. And therefore, I urge you to accept the updates and continue using the existing consultation process and guidance document. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, the panel is available for questions. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. We thank you for being a party to the rulemaking and for providing your written and oral testimony today. We now will move to hear from Western and Rural Local Government Coalition for 12 minutes. Good morning, Mr. Wynn.
Good morning, Chair and Commission. And we should have Dr. Ramey should be getting on, join as panelists here soon, looks like.
Yep.
There we
He's
go.
right outside.
Very good. Okay, with that, we'll get started right away. My name is Kirby Wynn, representative for the Western Rural Local Governments Coalition. With me today is Dr. Rob Ramey, a consultant that helps us on wildlife issues of state and federal importance and local importance. And today we'll provide some brief testimony on a few thoughts that we have. I'll begin with just some introductory testimony of kind of what our general position is, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Ramey to talk about some specific technical items. So just in general, just to start off, we appreciate the opportunity to give this testimony, and JBRLG definitely supports the mapping that was provided by Parks and Wildlife, while we also are going to offer some recommendations we'd like to discuss for future HPH rulemakings that may improve transparency of mapping methodologies and the quality of the resulting HPH map updates each year. JBRLG, again, we support CPW as the authority for determining mapped boundaries for wildlife and wildlife habitat resources. As established in the mission change rulemaking, you all are authorized and I guess generally expected to update the maps no more than annually through rulemaking, and we support this effort to ensure that the latest science and data are continually included by CPW and are utilized by y'all at ECMC, the operators and local governments, to efficiently consider and process oil and gas location permit applications while ensuring for sure the conservation of wildlife populations in those areas. We encourage ECMC to more closely coordinate with CPW each year and to request and share with local governments and stakeholders documentation of and support of CPW's use of improved mapping methodologies over time and data sources as well as they may become feasible. We also ask ECMC to foster earlier enhanced transparency for stakeholders regarding CPW methods and data utilized to produce the map updates for consideration and adoption by this commission. Improved transparency of map update methods would have the beneficial effect, we believe, of providing qualified stakeholders with the impetus and the opportunity to offer additional methodologies as well as local data and firsthand knowledge that could benefit wildlife via improved accuracy of the resultant maps over time. We believe our request regarding greater lead time for CPW stakeholder engagement and coordination ahead of these rulemakings is consistent with the 2023 ECMC HPH rulemaking, where we heard the indications that, and this is the quote, we expect to learn and understand other ways to improve our role in this process, and we hope to do that next year. And that was from CPW. And we've observed and directly benefited from and appreciated already CPW stakeholder engagement improvements that occurred earlier in the rulemaking process this year. We think there's other improvements that could be made. And we look forward to coordinating with ECMC and CPW to continue this path towards improved stakeholder engagement for future improved HPH maps and rulemakings. And of note, we really do appreciate, we've already been discussing with CPW, and we're working on scheduling for some of our initial meetings to talk about some more detailed technical issues that there's no reason to go into them today, but we look forward to talking to them about some of the methodologies in the future. So with that, I will now pass it on to Dr. Rob Roy Ramey to discuss our thoughts on some of these other issues. Dr. Ramey?
Thank you so much. I'd just like to add that while the coalition supports the adoption of the proposed map updates as presented, we also offer some comments on HPH mapping methods and opportunities for incrementally improving upon those methods and the maps as we go forward in annual map updates. We commend the efforts of CPW in compiling and analyzing the high-resolution GPS satellite radio collar data from big game to map migration corridors, lambing and calving areas, winter range and severe winter range, and accurately identifying, prioritizing habitat utilized by big game as well as non-game wildlife. This serves as a starting point of discussions for the long-term conservation of our natural heritage. In reviewing the proposed maps, as well as the scientific literature regarding habitat mapping, we've identified a couple of issues and offer suggestions relevant to only the future HPH mapping updates in rulemaking. So the first issue we see with some future map updates is that the extent that some areas designated currently as HPH may be based upon scant data, some low resolution analyses based on what was available, and expert opinion rather than a rigorous reproducible analysis of animal location data. While we recognize that GPS satellite collars are the gold standard, they are expensive, and that until more GPS collar data is available, some less accurate location data from traditional radio collars that you have to locate manually in the field, as well as some ground and aerial observations, just may have to suffice. So while that expert opinion, typically gathered from local wildlife managers, can be valuable as a first draft in identifying some important wildlife habitat and modeling habitat, it sometimes has limitations, including a tendency to capture a larger area of habitat than the data would otherwise show. A second similar issue is that when habitat mapping prioritizes all habitat equally of a certain type, so for example, migration corridors, so the migration corridor are used occasionally by, say, 4 animals versus 400 versus 4,000. Therefore, identifying the habitat of the greatest to least importance to individual wildlife populations is an obvious next step in HPH mapping, and recently pioneered by the Wyoming Migration Initiative in their mapping of elk, mule deer, and pronghorn migration corridors and winter ranges. Fortunately, Garfield County has a long and positive experience working with CPW to develop high-resolution habitat maps for greater sage grouse in the Parachute, Peasants, and Roan Plateau population. And we look forward to similar collaborations with CPW in the future on these and other species. That greater sage grouse habitat mapping effort began in earnest in 2012 and culminated in a robust, reproducible, fine-scale habitat map for the entire northwestern region and the population of greater sage grouse, and most important to Garfield County, for example, in a close collaborative effort with CPW and BLM. And this is a model of collaboration that is a model for not only this HPH rulemaking, but also for other states and communities across the West. And that greater sage grouse habitat map, high resolution, is currently being used by ECMC 1200 series HPH maps of record, and by Garfield County and the BLM in land use planning efforts, including the current draft Greater Sage Grouse Resource Management Plan amendment. And that collaboration was facilitated by a memorandum of understanding, as well as data sharing and non-disclosure agreements, so that the data did not go beyond its use in the mapping, thus protecting the wildlife. Our greater sage grouse example illustrates that science, especially science that is in the public interest, such as high priority habitat mapping, is an iterative process. And it is a process that can benefit from collaboration, consultation, and data sharing amongst different governmental agencies and the private sector. We therefore encourage the ECMC that is in the public's interest, as well as that of the protection of the wildlife that we collectively seek to conserve while allowing compatible land use, to encourage similar collaborative efforts between CPW, local governments, and the private sector to improve upon HPH mapping in the future, especially in any proposed project areas. So thank you very much, and glad to answer any questions you have. And if you don't mind, I'll just have a few concluding remarks, and we'll open up to questions for you all if you would like. Again, we thank you, this commission, the staff, for your consideration of our positions. And really, our requested relief is for this rulemaking is not much. I mean, we ask for the adoption of the proposed maps as proposed, as with all other parties. And two, we suggested modification of the recently released CPW consultation process for HPH, as requested by COGA, West Lobe COGA, and their pre-hearing statements and responses makes sense. That's not something to do within this rulemaking, but just something to look forward to and evaluate and adjust as necessary in the future. And we definitely look forward to collaborating directly with CPW in the coming year and future years on opportunities for improving HPH mapping methods and transparency. And so with that, we'd open up to any questions you may have, and we appreciate your giving us some time to visit with you today.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your written and oral testimony. The panel is open for questions from commissioners. All right, thank you very much. We now will turn to the last party presentation that is from Colorado Oil and Gas Association and West Slope Colorado Oil and Gas Association for 10 minutes.
Hello, good morning, commissioners, staff, members of the public, and other parties and stakeholders. My name is Julia Ryan, and I'm with the law firm of Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, representing the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. COGA appreciates the opportunity to present to you this morning, but like API has found that a formal presentation won't be necessary. Instead, I simply want to extend COGA's and West Slope COGA's gratitude to ECMC staff and CPW for its efforts in this rulemaking, and also for the recent publication of the CPW consultation process guidance document for operators' voluntary pre-application consultation and the formal consultation that's required by ECMC rules. As both Dr. Volterra and Mr. Elm noted, CPW has also provided additional engagement opportunities to review the maps both before they are noticed for rulemaking and during the rulemaking, and those additional engagement opportunities are very much appreciated. It is true, as WRA mentioned, that COGA raised a few concerns and questions about the guidance in its pre-hearing statement, but it's also clear from the requested relief in both COGA's pre-hearing statement and response that COGA is not requesting that the commission do anything more here or today other than adopt the maps and draft statement of specific statutory authority, basis, and purpose as it was noticed on February 28th. On the issue of guidance, I'll just say that COGA is looking forward to seeing how that guidance is implemented in practice and hopes its questions will be resolved through the course of that guidance being implemented. COGA asks that you adopt the maps and SBP as noted and has no further comments at this time. And because we're going last here today, I don't think any rebuttal will be necessary, but should another party choose to have rebuttal, I'll reserve the remainder of our time for any rebuttal as well. Thank you.
Once again, commissioners, the attorneys are available for questions. All right, seeing none, we thank you for your oral and written presentations.
Thank you.
All right, with that, commissioners, docket 24022200054 is open for commissioner deliberations. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think our silence in the questions speaks volumes in all of the work that's gone into this. I wanted to thank you all who have worked so hard on this, not just this year, but every year. To me, as is clear each time they present to us, CPW is an agency full of very skilled wildlife professionals who work extremely hard to conserve and manage wildlife on behalf of the people. And I particularly have appreciated their flexibility and engagement as this HPH process has evolved. It's equally clear from others who have presented that there are many others who have a deep knowledge of wildlife conservation and also continue to work to ensure the most accurate information possible. A lot of constant hard work goes into conservation in Colorado on many, many fronts, both governmental and non-governmental. And as demonstrated in this hearing, as well as in our frequent conversations about protection of wildlife, we're also glad to be partners in assisting wildlife conservation efforts in Colorado and fulfilling our mission of regulating energy development in a way that protects wildlife resources. I wanted to say I appreciate CPW's clarifications on the update schedule on the various layers that they've discussed, and I appreciate and encourage any opportunity to continue to focus on the regional update approach to the extent possible. I'm also grateful for the development of CPW's summary of proposed changes document, and I think this will be a very, very helpful document for many interested parties going forward. So thank you for implementing this improvement to the process. I also appreciate all the work on the recently released consultation guidance document, as has been noted by others today. And I also agree that this is a helpful approach to demonstrating and improving CPW's consultative role. And I wanted to express my gratitude to all constituents, interests, agencies, and to our staff on the timeliness of the process this year, and continue to advocate for the HPH process to occur as expeditiously as possible. And finally, I just wanted to state how impressed I am. I think, as API put it, at the boring nature of this hearing. And thank you all for working together so diligently on wildlife conservation. I think the testimony by the Western and Rural Local Government Coalition that this has been a model process was a great compliment to the work you all have done. And I'm very proud of the significant interest that all parties in Colorado have in conserving and protecting wildlife. Mr. Chair, I'm in favor of adopting these HPH updates as presented, and I'm happy to make a motion to do so as appropriate.
Thank you for the deliberative thoughts, Commissioner Ackerman. Further commissioners with thoughts? Commissioner Cross?
I'll just second what Commissioner Ackerman said and second his motion.
And just making sure, Commissioner Ackerman, that was a motion to approve the HPH maps.
Yes, sir. Formal motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Commissioner Ray.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I just want to make a couple of brief comments on behalf of the department. First of all, I want to recognize the hard work and expertise of Dr. Volterra, Mr. Elm, and other CPW staff in updating the high priority habitat maps and providing their presentation today. This work is critical to CPW's efforts to perpetuate the state's wildlife resources, and it's a significant undertaking for CPW, and I want to extend the department's appreciation for that work. I also want to thank the parties for their engagement in this hearing. Second, as has been discussed, I want to recognize that subsequent to last year's HPH rulemaking, ECMC and CPW staff developed the operator guidance document that has been referenced. As Dr. Volterra noted, that guidance document was finalized in April 2024 and represents significant collaboration with stakeholders to develop a document that clarifies the pre-application and consultation roles and expectations of operators and CPW staff to ensure consistent and productive engagement during wildlife consultations for proposed OGDPs and CAPs. The department appreciates the work of ECMC and CPW staff in developing that guidance document and the contributions of numerous stakeholders whose expertise and feedback improved the final document. And we look forward to continued collaboration with stakeholders in the implementation of that guidance. Finally, I want to note that Senate Bill 24-212 was signed into law yesterday. That bill formalized in state law the application of CPW's HPH framework to the siting of renewable energy projects. And while that provision is not regulatory in nature, I think it does illustrate the value the legislature sees in the consideration of HPH information in the siting of energy development. And I believe that that recognition is a credit to the good work of CPW staff and of this commission in applying HPH to the regulation of oil and gas operations. With that, I will conclude my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ray. Really appreciate your comments on behalf of the department. Further deliberative thoughts? All right, seeing none, we would vote on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The maps are updated. All right, let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back for a financial assurance presentation by Commissioner McGowan. We will return at 10:31. Welcome back, commissioners. We now have one final matter on the agenda this morning. It is a presentation by Commissioner McGowan on financial assurances. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Angelica is going to drive for me. Thank you, Angelica. Okay. So I want to thank Deputy Director Cuthbertson, who's going to be my phone a friend today, and Chris Eisinger, who helped pull together data for this presentation and help me answer some of the questions that I had about how we're doing on financial assurance since our rules have been in place for more than a year. So thank you to staff and all the work they provided and data they provided to help put together the presentation. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to do a refresher of our rules and how we got to where we're at. Rule 702 is the big one where all operators who have more than one or more wells in the state are required to file a Form 3, which is their financial assurance plan, to demonstrate how they're financially capable of fulfilling their financial obligations to take care of all their wells and then plug and abandon them when they're done. Next slide, please. Then Rule 707 allows the commission to review those plans annually to make sure that operators, if they have changed circumstances, still have adequate financial assurance to cover their portfolio. It also allows us to cover or require financial assurance for operators who might require financial assurance but don't have wells. So maybe they have a processing facility, for example, and that allows us to fold those folks in as well. I wanted to point out there had been some questions, I think, from some of our stakeholders about why the total number of financial assurance plans might not necessarily equal the total number of operators we have in our system. And that's because some operators are potentially waiting to close out their bonds or are waiting for just paperwork for final reclamation. And so they don't require financial assurance, but they are still reflected in our system. Staff is contemplating and working on how we reflect those kinds of operators in our system right now that might say active, and that might not truly represent the status of the operator within our system. Next slide, please. So a reminder, when we pass the financial assurance rules, these were the requirements for when financial assurance plans were due from the various operators based on the total number of wells that they have. And the last of our smaller operators were required to submit their financial assurance plans last year in February. Next slide, please. This is just a reminder of the different kinds of options that operators can choose, mostly based on their production levels, and then for some extenuating circumstances or individual circumstances that they might have. Next slide, please. All financial assurance plans have to have these basic components: information about their production data, the status of their wells, their well plugging activity over the past 3 years, how many inactive wells they have in their portfolio, an asset retirement plan as part of their financial assurance plan, the financial assurance amount that will be approved by the commission, the type of financial assurance that they will provide, and a certification of their financial capability. Next slide, please. So where are we at? As of May 14th, number of operators that were required to have a financial plan with the commission are 258, and that covers the total number of wells for the state, which is a little more than 43,000. You can see that we've approved 158 plans to date, which is 61% of the operators, but that actually covers 90% of the wells that are owned and operated in the state. We have 14 financial plans that are still under review. So that's another 16% of operators, another 8% of the wells, bringing us up to 98% of total covered wells. And then we have 60 operators for whom we have not heard from, and they have been sent some enforcement letters. And so they are currently in enforcement with the commission, and we're trying to close that out and figure out what's going on with those operators. You can see that's a small number of wells compared to the total number of wells in the state. And those are mostly operators with a very few number of wells that they own per operator. Next slide, please. These are the kinds of plans that the operators have chosen to apply under. 64 operators under option 1 or 2, which covers 22,000 of the state's wells. Another 90 for option 3 or 4, 1 option 5 operator, and then you all are aware that we have another operator that came to the commission, then we asked them to go back and sharpen their pencils, and then 3 option 6 operators. Next slide, please. I have to think about this one. Hold on. So when we think about the wells that are, the financial plans that are still under review, there's 40 of those. 2 of them are option 1 or 2. We have 25 option 3 or 4. One option 5 that we just talked about. So when you see that total number of wells, you can see if the other operator meets the option 5 requirements, We still have 12 more to go, but those will be very few wells and small operators that would be under that option 5 slice, and then no more option 6s. I think that's it. Thank you. Next slide. So when we look at how much financial assurance has been approved and is required by the commission and how much has been received, this is a nice summary of what we're seeing from the operators. So for the option 1 or 2 operators, you can see the total amount approved and what we required. You can see for option 3 or 4, the amount that we've approved is different from the amount that is required because those operators are under a 5% per year until they reach 100% or a 10% per year until they reach 100%. So that total amount, that 43.3, will gradually increase over the next 10 or 20 years based or dependent upon whether they're in the 5% or the 10% plan, right? The option 5 operator is all up to date. And then you can see what's happening with the option 6s. The other reason that you might see a difference between the amount that we've required and the amount that we've actually received to date, their difference might be they're within that 90-day window after we approve where they get to make their payments and submit their financial assurance, whether it's a bond or whatever type of a surety they decided. Or it might be that our staff is still processing the paperwork. They turned everything in, but we're going through it and approving it and finalizing everything. So that is partly the difference too. And then you can see in the option 3 category, it feels like there's a significant difference for financial assurance remaining compared to and how much we've been required. And we have one operator who the commission has not come to an agreement with, and that's $13.3 million of that total. Next slide, please. So one thing that, or question that I had based on some comments from folks who have been watching our financial assurance plan process was a concern that the commission is collecting less financial assurance than what we were collecting pre-Senate Bill 181. So you can see that in April of 2022, in-hand financial assurance was $243 million. May of this year, what's required is $286 million, so more than what we were requiring pre-Senate Bill 181, a little bit less in hand because we're still going through the process of collecting everyone's financial assurance. When you include the option 3 and 4 operators who have the 5 and 10% each year additive, you can see that the total financial assurance that will be collected at minimum will be $613 million. That does not include what changes might happen as we review the financial assurance plans annually and make adjustments. Next slide, please. Another concern that I have heard from some of our stakeholders is they were worried that a lot of operators would choose the option 3 or 4 option, but would not use the default costs that are in our rules, but instead choose to show demonstrated costs. So you all know that an operator, if they can demonstrate to the commission that their plugging and abandonment costs are different than the default costs that are in our rules, that's an option that they can go through with the commission and we can approve or deny that track that they might want to take. So 186 option 3 or 4 plans have been submitted. That doesn't include the plans that have been returned or not all the initial plans, but 129 of those chose the default or definition single well financial assurance in our rules. 57 requested the use of demonstrated cost. 12 of those have been approved. It only covers 164 wells. 15 have not yet been reviewed by the commission. That's an additional 322 wells. And then 30 have been denied by the commission. So those folks have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to adequately meet our financial assurance rules. So you can see not less than half operators have chosen a demonstrated cost option, and it's not a significant number of wells for operators who have chosen that pathway. Next slide, please. Another thing that I've heard from some stakeholders as part of what's happening with our financial assurance rules is concern that operators would put a significant number of wells on the out of service list and that they would not be then covered by financial assurance. So just a reminder, during our rules, we did allow operators to put wells on the financial out of service list in exchange for a commitment from them to plug those wells by dates certain. So based on the total number of wells you had in the out of service list, we either had to have those wells plugged by 2027 through 2030. Anyone or an operator who submitted their out of service list after the December 31st, 2023 deadline has to plug their out of service wells within a 4-year time frame. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, only option 1 and 2 operators can put their wells on the out of service list, and not have them covered or required to have single well financial assurance. Those are operators with higher production levels that the commission during its deliberations considered lower risk. Option 3 and 4 operators can also put wells on the out of service list, but doing so does not alleviate them from the requirement to provide full single well financial assurance for the wells on that out of service list. Next slide, please. So these are the number of wells. The top line is the number of operators who submitted their out of service list by the December 31st, 2023 deadline. We have 5,000 wells on that out of service list. Already 2,000 of those wells have been P&A'd by operators. No one has missed the deadline. The first one of which, if you recall from the slide before, is 2027. We have 80 wells that were submitted after the deadline on the out of service list. Those also had to be plugged by 2027. None of those have been plugged yet, but none of them have passed their deadline for plugging. So you can see that hopefully what you can see is that the incentive the commission put forward to get those wells P&A'd in exchange for the larger operators not having to provide financial assurance, hopefully everyone sees as this is a successful pathway to getting our wells P&A'd. Next slide, please. Another concern that I heard from folks or in the ether was that we might still have operators that are transferring a significant number of wells to another operator that might not have the capability or the ability to provide financial assurance for the wells that have been transferred. So while the commission does not and cannot control a private exchange between operators and the sale or transfer of wells, when the transfer occurs, we currently have a condition of approval on the transferring operator that says that they are responsible for the financial assurance for those wells until the operator to whom they have been transferred has adequate financial assurance to cover those wells. So this point moving forward, right, we should never have a well that's being transferred to another operator that will not have financial assurance coverage. Next slide, please. Another concern that I heard from folks was that a lot of operators would rush to choose the option 5 plan, which, as you may recall, is kind of the bespoke custom-made plan. Only one operator has been approved to date by the commission. It's not an avenue that I think we see as a commission that many operators are pursuing. And just a reminder to folks that the operator has to show, and this is the language in our financial assurance rules, it has to be custom made based on individual circumstances that make it unnecessary or unreasonable to submit another option plan, or only under exceptional circumstances. And I think the commission has been applying that lens to the option 5 operators. Next slide, please. Finally, you all may recall that as part of our deliberative process to update the financial assurance rules, some of our operators have wells that are on federal land, and we knew that the federal folks were going to be updating their financial assurance rules, and we wanted to wait till that process happened to figure out how to align what we require with what the federal government was going to require. So right now, the BLM did update their financial assurance rules, and our staff now has to figure out how to evaluate the equivalency for our rules with the new updated federal bonding requirements. And that's one of the next steps that our staff will be taking. Next slide, please. So conclusions. Almost all of our operators have approved financial assurance plans. When you look at the number of wells that are covered by financial assurance for Colorado, 90% of the wells, we are collecting or will have in hand a higher amount than the pre-Senate 181 amounts, and it will increase over time. The financial plans, I think, have showed that we have a lower risk to the state of having to take on abandoned wells. we still have work to do to finish approving initial plans. So those operators that we're still trying to find and are in enforcement, we need to address and resolve those non-responsive operators and finish the 40 that are still in the initial review process. And then evaluating what the bonding equivalency will be with our federal partners. Next slide. And then I just thought if you have questions, we can talk about any questions. But those were some of the questions that I had about where we were in our financial assurance, where we were at, and answering some questions that I felt that we had from some of our stakeholders. And I hope this was helpful. And I hope Deputy Director Cuthbertson is available to help me with phone or friend if you guys have questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner McGowan, for doing the homework to put all that together. You know, as one commissioner, I think that paints a very positive picture for us at the commission. I know at times other pictures have been painted that it's not as positive as you and Deputy Director Cuthbertson have determined based upon the spade work of looking at the actual plans that have been approved. I really appreciate it. I invite other commissioners, if you want to have a discussion with Commissioner McGowan or ask questions, now's the time. And I suppose that PowerPoint will be placed somewhere where folks can get into it on our website.
I think it's going to get added to the portfolio.
That is correct. We got it.
Thanks, Angelica. She's going to add a specific date too. I just put May because I wasn't sure when we were doing it.
Great, thanks. Any further questions? No questions means you did a great job of explaining. So thank you again, Commissioner McGowan. We really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to continuing to work on those remaining 40. Anything else for the good of the cause, folks? Seeing none, we would look to move. I'll move to adjourn.
It looks like Mr. Duranlo has raised his hand.
Oh, okay. I can't see his hand. Mr. Dronlo. Can we elevate him to the panel?
I believe Mr. Duranlo lowered his hand. It has declined to be elevated.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there's a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good work, folks. One of the more boring ECMC meetings, and boring is sometimes good. We will see you at our next agenda. Thanks.